few more people entering here. Now, today we are going to do Ms. Cash's first solo day, I suppose. We've got ourselves a presentation from our new in-house counsel here, Madeline Cash. Madeline, are you ready to go ahead and get started here?
I'm ready to go.
All right.
All right, I will share my screen here. And then I will start my slideshow. I think I figured out. Okay. Can everyone see the slideshow?
Yeah, it looks great.
Awesome. Wonderful. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're having a wonderful day. It's beautiful weather, probably few of those days left in Minnesota. So that's always a good thing. As Graham said, my name is Maddie Cash. I am a newer attorney here. If you haven't met me already. And if you have any questions on either what I'm going to present today or anything in the future, you're welcome to reach out, give me a call, whatever it is. So today, though, I'm going to be talking to you about the Minnesota Paid Sick and Safe Leave law coming into play in 2024. So the agenda of this presentation, we'll just go over kind of what is sick and safe time leave, how much leave can an employee earn, and how that has to be displayed to them and how they need to be aware of it, who are covered employees under this new law, who are the included family members, because a lot of these illnesses include also illnesses of family members or safety of family members, and current and local ordinances and how that comes into effect and how that's going to play out. So first is kind of an overview. What is earned sick and safe time? Starting January 1st in 2024, Minnesota employers, including townships, must provide leave to an employee that they can use whenever they are sick or to care for a sick family member, and also to seek assistance if that employee or an employee's family member is experiencing domestic abuse, sexual assault, or stalking. So an employer's existing leave policy, if you have one in place, such as PTO or something along those lines that fully meets the requirements of this new law, you wouldn't have to change the name or anything. The name of the employer's paid time off policy doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be called earned sick and safe time to meet the requirements. So if you have something in place, then that's fine. But starting in 2024, these new requirements are required. The Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry is the one responsible for enforcing these requirements, and any sort of affected employees can bring a civil suit to address violations of these requirements. So what can this earned sick and safe time leave be used for? First, obviously an employee can use the earned sick and safe time for reasons such as the employee's mental or physical illness and treatment or prevention of that care. And they can also use it for a family member's mental or physical illness and to treat or prevent those kinds of things. They can use it for an absence due to domestic abuse, sexual assault, stalking of that employee themselves or of a family member. And I'll kind of go over who is considered a family member in a minute. They can use it for the closure of an employee's workplace due to weather or public emergency. And they can use it for a family member's school or care facility closure due to weather or a family emergency. So if a child's school is closed due to a snow day or something along those lines. And they can also use it for when a health authority or health related professional determines that employee or family member is at risk of infecting others with a communicable disease like COVID-19 or something along those lines. So employees or employers are required to provide notice by January 1st or the start of employment, obviously, whichever one is later, in English and in the employee's primary language, informing them of their right to this earned sick and safe time leave. You also have to include this notice in the employee handbook if one exists. Obviously, if you don't have an employee handbook, that is not a requirement, but the Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry will prepare a uniform employee notice that can be used and that should be available in the 5 most common languages in Minnesota. I checked this morning, it's still not available, but hopefully in the future and certainly before January 1st, they'll have that available on their website. How much earned sick safe time leave can an employee earn? So the employers must provide 1 hour for every 30 hours worked. That can accrue up to a maximum of 48 hours per year. They can carry that over from year to year, and the ultimate maximum would be an 80-hour accrual. So once you reach 80 hours, it doesn't have to keep carrying over. The law doesn't require that the hours accrue when an employee isn't working either. Employees can offer more than that if they want, but they obviously cannot offer less than that. That is the bare minimum. The employers are required to include the total number of sick and safe time hours accrued and available on the earning statements provided to employees at the end of each pay period so that the employee knows how much the sick and safe leave they have used and how much they have remaining. Every sick and safe time that they take off, it must be paid at the same hourly rate as would be a regular working hour. And any paid time leaves begins on the first day of employment. So there are some options of how you can pay these out. There's one option called front loading, where you can provide all of the paid time hours at the beginning of the year. And that way they just know they have 80 hours. And that just helps with paperwork. So you don't have to report weekly by weekly how much they're earning. That might make it easier. You could just front load at the beginning of the year and then they know how much they're taking out. There's also, if you do that and you pay out at the end of the year, whatever sick time the employee has not used, then you don't have to carry on over into the next year. So that's kind of a benefit of doing that. As I mentioned, earned sick and safe time accrues on all hours worked, including overtime, unless obviously that employee is exempt from overtime in any way. So who are covered employees? I would say that this is the question that we have kind of tackled with the most since learning about this earned sick and safe time leave law coming into effect. Generally, the starting point for this future statute is Minnesota Statute 181.9445, which provides the definition for this statute and for the purpose of this law. It's not on the Revisor of Statutes website yet, but you can find it on the actual 2023 Session Law Chapter 53. Subdivision 5, which provides the definition of employee, is pretty clear on what that is. For the record, Subdivision 6 defines employer and lists towns. So towns are included as an employer, but employee is a little more complicated. So Subdivision 5 says an employee means any person who is employed by an employer, including temporary and part-time employees who perform work at least 80 hours in a year for that employer within Minnesota. So they do have 2 exceptions to this, and they list out those 2 exceptions. They say that it doesn't include an independent contractor or an individual employed by an air carrier as a flight deck or cabin crew member. And they kind of list scenarios in which that person would not be included. I don't think it's relevant to today, but those are the two kind of exceptions that they've listed out. Also, federal employees are not covered under Minnesota's earned sick and safe time leave law, and it also doesn't apply to building and construction industry employees who are represented by labor organizations and have a valid waiver within a bargaining agreement that kind of switches out these laws with something else that applies. Employees don't have to work or live in Minnesota, to be eligible for this. They do have to work within Minnesota. So they have to work they have to work 80 hours within Minnesota in order to be eligible. Any time worked in Minnesota is the only time that applies to this earned sick safe time leave. So if they're working part-time in Iowa, part-time in Minnesota, only the hours in Minnesota would count towards this earned time. And if an employer is based in Minnesota but has employees outside of the state, none of those employees would be covered by this law, obviously. But this is overall kind of a low bar. 80 hours a year is not very much. So it would likely include seasonal employees, part-time employees, anyone working that's at least that 80-hour a year mark, but that's pretty low bar. Now, another question that's come across our table quite a bit is whether township officers are included in this. Now, it doesn't specifically address whether elected appointed officials are included or excluded from this law, but they do list very specific exclusions from the definition, as we stated, neither of which are appointed or elected officials. So if they're not included in those exclusions, it's kind of a presumption that any omissions in statute are deliberate and by choice, not inadvertent. So the fact that they include these flight crews and independent contractors tends to show that they must have purposely meant to exclude elected officials. And not to mention, in the same chapter, in chapter 53, we have an example of the legislature specifically excluding elected officials from a different definition of employee. So they also, Minnesota statute 179A.03 subdivision 14, which specifically excludes elected officials from the definition of employee for public employment and labor relations purposes. This shows that they thought about that exclusion in a separate area of the chapter related to elected officials and declined to apply it to this one specifically. So what should we do? It's really a risk question. It's how much risk you're willing to undertake and what you are willing to do. Cautiously, you can assume that officers are covered by the new law, and give them the earned sick and safe time leave that you would any other employee. If you want to go kind of a riskier approach, you can consult with your town attorney, who can provide legal advice and prepare for whatever potential litigation down the road comes about. Included family members. Family members are also included in this earned sick safe time leave. Any employee can take time off for a family member as they would themselves. Basically, anyone is included. They list out all of these family members: child, spouse, domestic partner. I'm not going to ramble on and list them out for you guys, but if you look at those last two as well, any other individual related by blood or whose close association is the equivalent of a family, and up to one individual annually designated by the employee. It can really be anyone. And they're really just, I think, trying to encompass the vast array of what people consider a family. You know, family is pretty an ambiguous term. So I think it really could be anyone that an employee considers to be family. Some cities have earned sick and safe time leave local ordinances. I don't know how many townships have those right now, but I know that Bloomington, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Duluth have these ordinances in play. if you have an ordinance, whatever is the most protective of employees, that's the one that would generally stand. So that's the one that would be in play once this law goes into effect. So in summary, this goes into effect on the January 1st of 2024. It requires employers, including townships, to provide their employees who work within the state with earned sick and safe time leave. That can be used for mental or physical illnesses for that employee or a family member, or to seek assistance if the employee or their family member is experiencing domestic abuse, sexual assault, or stalking. So, does anybody have any questions for me? I can't see the chat, so I'm sorry. I will stop sharing here so I can see. Okay. I don't know what I see the questions here. I don't know what the 5 most common languages are in Minnesota. They didn't have those listed on what they will be providing, but those will be available before January 1st. So do we need to?
Maddie,
Yeah.
Graham answered that question further down.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I couldn't see the chat while I was presenting. So, so the elected clerk or treasurer, we don't know if they should be covered under this law. They don't specifically say, and they don't specifically exclude them either. So it's really a risk question on whether you want to cover them or not. Am I missing any other questions? I mean, proving that an employee isn't taking vacation, the employee, in order to use this earned sick safe time leave, they do need to use it for one of those reasons listed there: the mental or physical illness, domestic violence, a closure of a school or children sick, along those lines. Someone needs to be ill. So they do need to use it for those listed reasons. I don't believe the township does have to have an ordinance in regards to this new law. No, I was just saying that some do already. So if the ones that do have an ordinance in place, whatever is more protective of the employee would be the one that they would use going forward. What about salaries of employees whose hours aren't tracked? I would suggest beginning to track them, because those once they reach 80, they do need to be covered by this earned sick safe time leave. So it would be important to know when that happens. We are all part-time domestic sick leave, but does this mean that we still will pay out if they want to take this time? So you don't have to pay out the earned and sick safe time leave unless you choose the option where you front load everything. So if you're front loading for all 48 hours of the year and you don't want to carry over to the next year, then you would want to pay those out. Paying them out in general is an option, though. You don't have to at the end of the year. Am I missing any other questions? Front loading. So front loading these hours, the employer can, in order to just kind of avoid the headache of the paperwork, because you have to warn each employee on every pay stub how much sick time they've used and how much they have left. So if you kind of want to avoid having to math out how much they have left, you can front load at the beginning of the year and say, hey, you have 48 hours for this entire year, and then you can use them as you go. And that's a little bit of an easier option. You can front load all 80, or you can front load just the 45 that are required for the year. But if you pay those out, you don't have to carry those over onto the next year. So if you front load 48 hours the first year and you pay out whatever that employee hasn't used, then you don't have to carry them over into the next year. But if you choose not to pay those out, then you do have to carry them over. Does that make sense? There wasn't an exclusion listed from coverage if they don't track their own time. I didn't see any sort of exclusion that existed like that, no. What do you pay out for salaried employees who don't have an hourly wage? Whatever they would be regularly paid for that work, whatever work they are taking off. It just says whatever their normal pay would be for that time, that's the pay that they receive. So you don't have to pay out. The only time you would want to pay out the leave that isn't taken at the end of the year is if you don't want to carry over that leave into the next year. But it's not required, no. All right, any other questions? Anyone else? Anything I'm missing? There is an FAQ on the labor website, the DOL website. There's an FAQ that kind of goes through all of this as well, has more information on front loading and your options there. So that's definitely a good source. I can try to get a link to it really quick in the chat. Thanks, Graham. So whatever that employee would be paid for the time that they take off is the PTO that they would receive on this earned sick and safe time. I hope that answers your question, Sandy. All right, I think that's all of the questions. If not, please let me know because I tried to answer all of them, but I might have missed one. The limit is 80 hours. Yep. Yeah, so this isn't vacation pay. This is sick leave. So this is paid sick leave. This isn't vacation time. Yeah, this is new. Yeah, this is a new requirement for sure. Yeah, everybody needs a mental health day so you don't go crazy. Online reporting. Oh, sorry. Is there a reporting document? There's no for reporting. Sorry, Nancy, I'm confused by your question. So once you reach 80, you don't need to pay out the hours unless you don't want to carry them over. So they are carried over, but if you agree to carry them over, you don't need to pay them out once the person reaches 80 hours. It's up to the township to make that decision. But there is more information on front loading and kind of what that would look like, what those options are on the Department of Labor website that Graham linked in the chat there. So that can provide you with more information as well. Sure, we can cover this again at the annual conference in more detail and go through a Q&A and have more conversation about it, certainly. All right. All right, is that all? No, you don't need a resolution to have this in place. Yep, no problem. I will exit. I don't think I'm sharing my screen anymore, but I will.
All right. Well, if anybody has any more questions, please feel free to sing out here. But otherwise, thank you very much for covering this, Maddie. And thank you all very much for your time and for your attention. We will certainly consider doing a presentation on this one at the annual conference. I think given the January deadline for a lot of this stuff, that's a great time for, well, we're going to be covering this stuff in a variety of formats, just because I think it's important for our members to know. And obviously it's a confusing and somewhat, there are lots of bubbles of ambiguity in this statute, I think is maybe the best way to say it. So, all right, well, thanks very much for your time and your attention, and have a good morning, everyone.